Everyone knows when the circus comes to town, there will always be a show. The traveling band of entertainers brings along with them things most country folk like you or me would never even imagine. Creatures from faraway lands, people with strange abnormalities, and daring stunts that will leave you in awe. I know that one of you watching this probably remembers going to the circus when they were younger. Can you picture yourself there now? Can you smell the animal shit? Just give it a oh yeah, oh yeah, fucking yes, be a Yankee Candle. But one of the best parts of the circus was the show that was so small in scale, you would need a magnifying glass to see it. Near the big high top was a smaller tent that housed one of humanity's greatest accomplishments. The Flea Circus. Some would say that going to the moon or curing diseases would be man's greatest achievement. Fuck that. The Flea Circus was what God planned for us, taking the tiniest little shits on the planet and taming them to do this. A flea circus is best described as a performance where a group of Cyprinoptera would perform acts of strength and pure wonder to show off their skills. The common flea is surprisingly a strong animal. While only being 1/8 of an inch long, a flea can pull 160,000 times its own weight. It could jump 200 times its own body length. And did I mention that they're indestructible? Although they might only live for 3 months at most, the flea was evolved to live a life of daring. So why not force them into a shoebox and make them perform party tricks? A lot of you are probably asking yourselves now, how the hell does someone come up with such a genius idea? Well, long ago, watchmakers would show off their skills by collecting fleas and placing them in tiny scenes. They would show them having lunch or going over domestic disputes. I'll tell you this was great portfolio work. As a watchmaker back in the olden days, this was relatively normal. If you try doing this nowadays, PETA might come after you for taking their job of animal cruelty. Now, someone back in the day, probably someone with too much time on their hands, said something along the lines of, hey, this is fun and all, but what if we could make the fleas do something cool, like write a tech deck? This was once said by an Italian man named Louis Bestellato. He wanted to give the spotlight to the fleas instead of the tiny devices the watchmakers made for them. The Flea Circus was a low-cost investment for all traveling circuses. Most of the performances were all set in one suitcase. The props would be created by the same watchmakers and sold at a fair price. One of the most common questions asked about the flea circuses is, how did they catch all the fleas? Well, at the time, fleas were everywhere. They would be in beds, your hair, the ground. In a house alone, there would be hundreds. Literally hundreds. Entertainers would collect as many as possible and place them in a jar with cotton and pick the best candidates for later. To control the fleas, thin golden wire would be wrapped around the body. This did not hurt the flea and gave them enough mobility to have them perform. And once the flea was picked, it would be forced to do tricks and party favors until it died of starvation. And no one would care. Their cries went unanswered. But the fleas were not always in terrible condition. Some owners of flea circuses were generous enough and fed their fleas after a performance. So how do you feed a flea? Well, you grab someone's hand, preferably not your own, and then you would just let the fleas go wild. If flea circuses were still popular today, I think the feeding process would be more industrial. Here's my design of what it would look like. So what tricks did the fleas do? Well, they either pulled chariots, jumped a lot, danced, or fought with swords. How this would be considered sword fighting, I have no fucking clue. But sadly, it was never meant to last long. During the 1950s, a massive protest by the rats went across the world. They claimed that the flea caused the Black Plague and not the rats. Propaganda created by the special features DVD of Ratatouille pushed the false narrative even more. This campaign of hate caused the deaths of countless fleas. Rioters would even burn down tents housing the fleas during the circus performances. With the added assault of hygiene techniques like taking a shower, the flea was pronounced extinct in 1954. In the 21st century, it was learned that the Black Plague was an airborne disease, and the genocide of the flea was for nothing. You will never see a flea again. They are all gone. A large number of people, however, will say that the flea is not extinct, and some might claim to be running their own flea circuses. But these people are liars and charlatans. If there's anything to learn, it's this. Man's hubris, yeah, I don't know where I'm going with this, actually.